The legislature has concluded its lawmaking and adjourned for the year, and we are now in the interim period of work preparing for next year's legislative session. Hi, I'm Representative Roger Goodman from the 45th Legislative District, and I'm coming to you from the state capitol here in Olympia to report on what was a truly historic legislative session. We began this year's legislative session at the peak of the coronavirus pandemic, not knowing what we would be able to accomplish operating remotely by teleconference. But we accomplished sweeping reforms in many areas of public policy. We had 4 major policy priorities this year. First, the pandemic itself and responding to its effects on education, housing, the justice system, and many other areas. Second, the economic recovery. Many people were out of work and businesses shut, and we wanted to build back the economy stronger. Third, racial justice. We had protests in our streets and calls for social and racial equity. And finally, the climate crisis, something we cannot afford to wait to address. 10 years ago, during the Great Recession, we passed what some called the austerity budget, slashing social services, higher education, and environmental protection. This time, we learned our lesson and instead made major investments to spur economic recovery and expand opportunity for everyone. This year's budget included $3.2 billion for public health, vaccine distribution, contact tracing, and testing to address the pandemic. $1.8 billion for rental assistance to keep people in their homes and to protect homeowners against foreclosure. We also invested almost $1 billion for tax relief and grants for small businesses, and $400 million for grants to child care providers. We invested $500 million for our behavioral health system, including substance use disorder and mental health treatment, mobile crisis teams, increased bed capacity for those suffering from behavioral health disorders, and the new 988 crisis line for people to call when they need help. We also invested in the safety net, including the Working Families Tax Credit, to help people who are living on the edge with a little bit of extra money for living expenses and housing. We invested in an expanded paid medical and family leave program, for food assistance, and for nursing homes and long-term care. In education, we shored up our support for the K-12 system, including more counselors in schools and access to broadband for all students. We also invested in our higher education system, especially job skills programs and our workforce colleges, the community and technical colleges. This year we had a particularly sharp focus on racial equity, especially reform of the justice system, which is my area of jurisdiction as I chair the Public Safety Committee. We passed a major suite of bills related to police accountability, upholding the policing profession, and improving the relationships between police and the community, including bills to add more transparency for the public about police interactions with the community, a bill to severely limit questionable police tactics, a bill to require de-escalation as a priority to avoid the use of force and the use of deadly force, requiring police to intervene when they see the misconduct of other officers, making sure that investigations of police misconduct and use of force are entirely independent, and strengthening the state's ability to decertify or take the license away from police who engage in serious misconduct or patterns of repeated misconduct. In other areas, we also banned private prisons so that there's no longer prisons for profit. And we finally began to wind down the tragic failed war on drugs, focusing more on therapeutic care rather than the half-century failed policy of punishment. There is some unfinished business in the area of the justice system, particularly sentencing reform, something I'm going to be working on intensively this year in preparation for next year's session, so that we use incarceration much more judiciously and have more community-based responses to people who violate the law. We championed environmental protection measures, particularly addressing the climate crisis, by capping carbon emissions and establishing a low-carbon fuel standard. Carbon emissions will be capped by the year 2050. We're only the second state in the nation to accomplish this, and so the nation is watching. We also banned styrofoam or polystyrene and other single-use plastics. So the next time you order dinner delivered to your house, there won't be a fork in there unless you ask for one. In the area of forest health, we invested more than $50 million to restore our forests and to reduce the danger of wildfires. These measures were only some of the dizzying array of landmark bills that we passed this year, a session unlike any in a generation, and all during a pandemic and operating remotely. It's important to note that this year's legislative session operated in a very congenial fashion, where we disagreed, but in an agreeable manner, and I'm proud to have been a part of that. There's a lot more work left on the table, and I'm looking forward to getting back to work next legislative session to expand opportunity and prosperity for all, to promote our health, to support our families and our schools, and to keep our communities safe. Thanks very much for watching, and thanks for your interest in civic affairs and public policy.